By the time the fire reached the orchard, the wind had changed. What had started as a spark in the southern hills now crawled down through the trees, slow but relentless, glowing low under the smoke. The snow from last week still clung to the shaded hollows, gray and melting, steaming when the embers touched it. The fox watched from the fence line. He was small, red fur dulled with soot, a thin scar across his muzzle. He'd been living in the old orchard since autumn, feeding on field mice and the occasional hen that wandered too far from the village edge. He didn't understand fire, only that it moved like hunger, and that it came for everything in its path. When the first crackle reached the lower trees, he flinched. The air tasted wrong, dry, metallic, the kind of smell that meant the world was about to change. The orchard was dying quietly. The bare branches were backlit by smoke, their shapes black against orange. The fire wasn't roaring yet, just whispering, creeping from root to root. From the hill above the field, Mara Denon saw the glow and ran. She carried a shovel and a bucket of water, foolish tools against something already too large. Her breath came in quick bursts of steam as she crossed the frozen ruts of the road. "Damn it, not the orchard," she muttered. Her father had planted those trees 40 years ago. He died last winter and she'd kept them alive as best she could, pruning, watering, hauling fallen limbs to burn piles. Now, they were burning on their own. When she reached the fence, she saw the fox. He was sitting perfectly still, his body framed in the glow. For a second, through the shimmer of heat, he looked unreal, a statue cast in copper. Then, he turned his head toward her. Their eyes met across the smoke. "Go on," she called. "Get out of there." He didn't move. The fire crept closer, licking the dry grass near the fence posts. Mara dropped the bucket and swung the shovel, flinging dirt onto the flames. Sparks jumped back at her. Tiny, glowing insects. "Move!" she shouted again, coughing on the smoke. The fox tilted his head, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. Then, at last, he turned and darted toward the field, vanishing into the low fog that hung beyond the orchard. Mara stood for a long moment, panting, watching the flames crawl through the lower trunks. By midnight, the wind died down. The fire burned itself out in patches, leaving behind smoldering heaps of branches and the long hiss of wet wood. The orchard survived, half of it anyway. The northern rows were blackened, the soil white with ash. She walked between the trees as the smoke lifted, the cold air returning in slow breaths. The moon hung pale and washed out above the valley, its light mixing with the dying glow of the embers. The ground was littered with gray flakes that drifted down slowly, soft as snow. She caught one on her glove, light, fragile, gone the moment her breath touched it. The fox returned just before dawn. She saw him first by movement, a flick of tail near the charred fence. He approached quietly, cautious, but not afraid, and sat near the first row of burned trees. "You again," she said, voice low. "You came back." He looked at her, then at the orchard, where the last coals still pulsed faintly under the ash. For a long time they stood there, woman and fox, watching the ground steam in the first light. The smell of smoke clung to everything. When she turned to leave, the fox followed her halfway to the road before stopping. He sat down, curling his tail around his paws, eyes bright in the gray morning. Mara looked back once. "You'll be all right," she said. "You made it through." The fox blinked once, slow and calm, as the wind picked up the ash and carried it into the dawn. It fell around them like snow, quiet, endless, and strangely gentle. And for the first time since the fire began, the orchard smelled faintly of spring again, hidden somewhere beneath the smoke and the ruin, waiting. The fire had gone out 3 days ago, but the land still remembered it. The air smelled faintly of charcoal and thawing soil, the scent that comes when something has burned, but refuses to die. The orchard was a skeleton of itself, half the trees black, half clinging to their color like the stubborn dew in the face of loss. Mara came back at dawn. She walked the rows with her gloves still stiff from the last time she'd been there. The snow that had fallen during the night mixed with ash, turning the ground into a soft gray paste. Her boots sank deep. Everywhere she looked, the world had been erased. No birds, no wind, just the soft hiss of the melted snow, dripping from the branches. Then she saw them. Footprints. Small, sharp, clear. They led from the fence line to the old water trough and stopped there. A fox's prints, light and neat, pressed into the ash like handwriting. You again, she murmured. She followed them carefully, her breath clouding the air. At the trough, the snow was melted to a thin sheet of ice. The surface had been broken at the edge, as if something had tried to drink and found only cold air. She crouched beside it and ran her gloved finger along the rim. The ice was slick, and faint traces of fur clung to the edge. She imagined the animal here at night, nosing through the blackened orchard, waiting for the world to taste like itself again. The thought made her smile, faint and tired. "You're stubborn," she said. "Same as me." She straightened, brushing ash from her knees. The wind shifted then, a slow, cautious gust that stirred the gray dust and made the charred branches creak. The sound was almost human, like the orchard whispering in its sleep. She stayed a while longer, clearing fallen branches, stacking what could still burn in small piles. The fox didn't appear, though she felt him watching. It wasn't the kind of feeling you could explain. It was more like the knowledge of being seen by something older and quieter than people. When the light began to fade, she sat on the fence with a thermos of tea, watching the orchard's shadow stretch across the field. That was when she saw movement at the far edge, a flash of red against gray. The fox stepped out from between two burnt trunks. He limped slightly, one back leg stiff. His fur had darkened with soot, the white tip of his tail the only clean color left. Mara set her thermos aside. "You shouldn't come this close," she said softly, though she made no move to stop him. He paused, head tilted, eyes bright with something that wasn't fear. He came closer, slow, his paws leaving faint prints in the thin layer of snow. "You remember me?" The fox stopped a few feet away. The air between them shimmered with the faint warmth of breath and fire long gone. "You do," she said. "You waited too." He looked toward the orchard then, to the blackened rows, the faint steam still rising from the soil. His ears flicked once. Mara followed his gaze. A few of the younger trees, those on the far edge of the burn, still stood with a trace of green at their roots. Beneath the ash, new shoots had begun to press through. Life, small and defiant. She smiled. Maybe it's not all gone. When she looked back, the fox was gone again. Only his footprints remained, leading toward the northern fence, fading into the distance. The wind picked up, carrying a few flakes of ash across her coat. They glowed faintly in the last light of day, pale and slow, falling the way snow falls when the world forgets how to rush. She watched them settle into the soil. For a moment, it looked like the orchard was breathing again. Smoke turning to mist, mist to life. Somewhere beyond the fence, she heard a sharp bark. One sound. Then, silence. She packed her things and turned toward home, the sky behind her bleeding from gray to orange. By the time she reached the road, the footprints were half gone, blurred by the wind. But the feeling stayed, that something else had survived the fire with her, something that remembered warmth the way she did, not as comfort, but as promise. And as the evening came down, slow and cold, she could still see the last flecks of ash floating through the air, soft, weightless, falling like snow on a world learning how to live again. By the third morning, the smoke had thinned to a faint, invisible taste in the air, that ghost of burning that clings even when the wind moves on. The orchard was quieter now, stripped to its bones. The snow was melting fast, turning the ground to gray water and black mud. The trees stood like rows of old sentinels, crooked and charred, their shadows long and broken across the thawing soil. Mara parked the truck halfway down the lane and walked the rest. The engine's noise always felt wrong here, too loud, too alive. The orchard didn't like noise anymore. It wanted whispers. It wanted silence. She carried a sack of feed under one arm. Not for the fox, not exactly. For the crows, the field mice, the small things that still lingered. She needed the illusion that something besides her was still hungry. When she reached the fence, she saw them again. Footprints. Fresh. The snow had crusted over during the night, but his paws had broken through the top layer, leaving sharp impressions all along the edge of the field. "You're still here," she said aloud. voice almost lost in the wind. The footprints led past the trough, down the northern row where the ground was still warm enough to steam faintly in the cold. She followed, careful not to disturb them. The air smelled clean now, stripped of its sweetness, the way earth smells after it's been remade. At the far end, where the orchard met the slope, the fox was waiting. He sat beneath one of the surviving trees, the only one with bark unburned and roots still holding color. His coat had begun to clean itself, the red showing through again, though his left hind leg was still stiff when he shifted. She stopped a dozen paces away. "You've claimed this place, haven't you?" The fox didn't move. He only turned his head slightly, as if to see her without really looking. Mara leaned against a blackened trunk. The wood was still warm to the touch, faintly, like a stove cooling down. "You're not afraid of me anymore." The fox flicked his ear, the smallest acknowledgement. She lowered the sack and pulled out a handful of seed, scattering it on the ground. "You'll have company soon enough. The birds will come back when they think it's safe." The fox stood, stretched once, and sniffed at the ground. When he stepped forward, his paws left clean prints through the ash. He passed near her without hurry, without fear, and for a brief second, she caught the smell of him. Not wild, not tame. Something between earth, smoke, and rain. He circled once around the unburned tree, then lay down at its base. The way he did it, calm, certain, made her think of someone returning home. Mara sat down a few feet away, pulling her knees to her chest. "You picked the right one," she said. "This tree will live." The wind moved through the branches, shaking loose what was left of the ash. It drifted down around them in slow, uneven flakes. The light caught it just right, and for a moment, it looked like snow again. Mara tilted her head back, watching it fall. "You ever wonder," she said quietly, "if the fire remembers what it burns?" The fox's ears turned toward her voice, but he didn't move. She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why it keeps coming back. Just trying to find what it lost." The clouds shifted and a shaft of sunlight broke through, touching the fox's fur and the black bark behind him. The color was sudden and startling. Red against coal, gold against gray. For the first time, the orchard didn't look like ruin. It looked like something waiting to begin again. The fox lifted his head, eyes bright in the light. Mara stood, brushing ash from her coat. "You stay here then," she said. "Keep watch. Someone should." She started back toward the road. Behind her, she could hear the faint sound of paws against thawing ground. Not following, just moving, circling the same few living trees, like a guardian walking a border. When she reached the truck, she turned one last time. The orchard lay behind her like a quiet field of smoke, and the sunlight hung in long golden bars through the mist. The fox was still there, a small red flame in the gray, his tail curled tight around his body. The air shimmered faintly above the burned soil, like breath rising. And as Mara drove away, she thought of how ash falls, how it drifts and settles and feeds what comes next. In the mirror, the orchard faded behind her, but the faint glow of that color, the red of the fox, the gold of the light, stayed with her like memory refusing to cool. By the fourth day, the air had begun to thaw for real. The sharp edge of winter softened, the ground no longer brittle but damp, alive. The orchard still looked broken from a distance, a field of black ribs against the sky. But when you walked between the trees, you could smell something different. Beneath the smoke and soot, there was green. Mara came early that morning. The frost had melted overnight and refrozen in delicate sheets, so the ruts in the dirt road glistened like cracked glass. The sky was the color of tin. The fire scars on her hands had stopped stinging, though they still itched when the wind came cold from the west. She stopped at the fence and looked over the orchard. The ash was thinner now, clumped in damp gray patches. Beneath it, the first blades of grass were forcing their way up, faint and stubborn. The kind of growth that happens when the earth decides to keep going, no matter who's watching. The fox was already there. He sat by the same tree, the one that had lived through it all, his body small against the wide, bare field. The morning light turned his coat to copper, his breath to small white clouds. Mara leaned her arms on the fence. "You never leave, do you?" The fox turned his head slightly, just enough to let her know he'd heard. I guess this place belongs to you now. She crossed the field slowly. Her boots made soft sounds in the mud, and the smell of thawing earth rose around her. The closer she got, the more she could hear the drip of melting ice from the branches, like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. When she reached the tree, the fox didn't move. He just watched her. His eyes weren't afraid, not tame either, but curious, as if she was part of the same slow story the land was telling. She crouched down, resting one hand on the damp soil. Her fingers came away dark gray. You know, she said, the old folks used to say, fire cleans the world. They never said how quiet it gets after. The fox's ears flicked. Mara smiled faintly. Guess you don't need words for that. They sat like that for a while, woman and animal, neither moving much. The clouds shifted overhead, letting in a pale stripe of sunlight that caught on the wet branches. The light wasn't bright, but it was warm, the kind of light that felt earned. When she finally stood, she brushed the dirt from her hands. I'll leave you something, she said. From her coat pocket, she took a small piece of dried meat, a leftover from her lunch the day before. She set it on a flat stone near the roots. The fox didn't move toward it. He only blinked once, slow, and turned his gaze toward the line of hills beyond the orchard. You'll take it when I'm gone, she said. She started back toward the road, her boots leaving soft prints in the mud. The air was warmer now. She could hear the faint hum of insects waking under the bark. Halfway across the field, she stopped. The wind had shifted again. Not cold anymore, just restless. It moved through the trees, stirring the ashes from the branches. They fell in tiny, bright flakes, catching the sunlight as they drifted down. She turned back. The fox was still by the tree, surrounded by falling ash that glimmered like snow. His coat caught the light, the red deep and alive against the gray world. For a moment, everything was still. No fire, no sound, no time. Just the quiet shimmer of what had survived. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. Not grief exactly, but its quieter twin. Understanding. The kind that doesn't ask for comfort, only witness. She raised a hand, half in farewell, half in thanks, though she wasn't sure which one she meant. When she reached the truck, she looked back one last time. The orchard no longer looked burned from that distance, only waiting. The fox was a speck of color at its heart, unmoving, a flame that refused to go out. The clouds had broken open by then. The sunlight poured down, thin but steady, across the trees, across the field, across the small body, keeping watch beneath them. And as Mara drove away, ash began to rise again in the breeze, weightless, slow, silver in the light. It fell across the road in soft spirals, landing on the hood of the truck, on her coat, on the world itself. Gentle as snow, warm as memory, and so quiet she could almost mistake it for peace.